We're so glad you could join us. I'm Susanna Cram, I'll be your chair today. Firstly, I do want to acknowledge that most of us are on First Nations land, and today I'm on Gubbi Gubbi land. So in the spirit of reconciliation, the Statistical Society of Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Given this webinar is also open to members of New Zealand Statistical Association, I'd like to additionally extend this respect and welcome to Maori people too. So today will be awesome. We have three eminent researchers who will each present for around 10 minutes, followed by an extended discussion and question time. You're very welcome to type your questions in the chat window during the presentations, and I'll read these out during question time. If your question is for a specific panel member, please include their name, otherwise it'll be open to the entire panel. If you want to directly state your question to the panel, you can just say so in the chat window and I can invite you to ask your question directly. But you, our wonderful audience, also have a lot of knowledge, and we really want to hear your tips, comments and thoughts around writing fellowships. So please also feel free to add these to the chat window. Please send all questions and comments to everyone via chat so that we can all benefit. And for anyone able to stay afterwards, as Mark mentioned, there'll be an opportunity to briefly meet and mingle with each other and the speakers in small group breakout rooms. So we're very delighted to have a trio of brilliance today, three outstanding statisticians who are also lovely people. They're also all past presidents of SSA. It's Distinguished Professor Kerrie Mengersen, Professor Scott Sisson, and Professor Adrian Barnett. So Kerrie will speak first, followed by Scott, and finally Adrian. So please welcome Kerrie. Thanks.
Thanks, Susanna. Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk and this invitation. This is an important topic, and I think it's great that we have a conversation around fellowships and writing for different fellowships. I've been asked to talk about the ARC Laureate Fellowships, and these are the senior ARC fellowships that are provided. And just to give some background on these, the main topics that the ARC look for in these, the assessment criteria are going to be around research, excellence in research, and they're really looking for world-class research, leaders in Australia. So are you the leader in Australia in your field? And you can very carefully define what that field is. So it can include a lot of us who are leaders in our particular fields. Around linkages, so that's linkages across Australia and internationally, so it's really important to highlight those linkages. It's about to expand the scale and the focus and the deliverables on Australia's national priority areas. And so when you're writing a grant for any of the fellowships, but particularly for the ARC Laureate Fellowships, this is going to be really focused on the national priorities and how can you align your work to those. And finally, it's going to be around training and mentorship. So that's training of PhD students and postdocs, and then mentoring through to the wider community through outreach, and also to the younger generation coming through in your particular area and more broadly. So there are two special ARC Laureate Fellowships as well, so two special awards. One is the Kathleen Fitzpatrick Award, and the other one is the Georgina Sweet Award. So the Kathleen Fitzpatrick Award is given to an outstanding researcher, Laureate Fellow in the Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences area, and the Georgina Sweet Award is for an outstanding Laureate Fellow in the Science and Technology area. And these are two women researchers, and then part of the aim is for role modelling and mentorship to women. And so women researchers who are applying for laureates should then, can make a case to have these awards and be considered for these specific awards as well. So when you're considered for those awards, you're first considered as a Laureate Fellow, and then amongst the Laureate Fellows, then you're considered for one of these awards. So I've been both successful in obtaining an ARC Laureate fellowship and also been part of the selection panel for the Laureate Fellows. And so I've seen the process from both sides of the table. And the criteria that are considered by the panelists or by the panel. So the panel are drawn from a very wide range of areas, and so they're not necessarily going to be in your specific area. So it's important that you write so that your reviewers or the reviewers of your application who may be more in your domain will be able to follow and to understand the depth of the work that you're proposing, but also that the panel members can understand as well, you know, your area. So even though you need to write a proposal that is deep in terms of detailed, you also need to be able to write one that's readable across a broader range of people who are experts but in different areas. And so you're writing to the learned society. So you're writing to the criteria around the investigators, so that's 40% is going to be for the investigator. The project and innovation, the research and the project is around 25%. Then there's the benefit, the national benefit is around 10%. And then the mentoring and capacity building is around 25%. So you can see that there's a lot of emphasis on the investigator, on the laureate themselves, and then there's also equal emphasis on the project and the innovation of the research and on the mentoring and capacity building. And embedded in that is this national benefit. So if you think about this then, you're really writing to the AEIOU. So you're writing about the academic, you're writing about the person, what's their strength. You're writing about the E, which is the education. How are you going to train the next generation? About I is going to be about the innovation of the research. What is it that's new and exciting and really trying to tell that exciting story that's the horizon? What's on the horizon in your area and how are you going to address those challenges in a really clearly articulated body of work? And then the O is about outreach, and so you want to be able to engage with the broader community, to the professional societies, to the public, to the schools, to your peers in the broader area. And then the U is about understanding, and I've got that there because it's really about making sure that your research can be understood and can be articulated to be exciting by other people. So it's the AEIOU of the application. When I first wrote my laureate proposal, and I gave it to somebody to read because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I have to write this as if it's something that's going to be really special. I wrote it in a way that when the person who was reviewing it, who was a very experienced reviewer, this was before I submitted it, they said, what are you trying to do? Like, Kerrie, I don't understand what this, what's the aim? And I'm going, oh, well, it's about this and it's going to be around big data and Bayesian analysis. And I'll show you in a minute what I ended up writing. And they said, well, why don't you write it like that? So part of the art of writing any application, I think, but, and when I'm talking about these fellowships, is to be able to write it like that, trying to write on paper, articulate what it is that's exciting and passionate for you, and to be able to say that. So in a way that still communicates the professionalism of your area, but certainly conveys just what it is that you're on about, rather than trying to write it in sort of academic speak. So I'll share my screen, and at the risk of noting that this is quite old now, so the application, I'm in the last year of my fellowship now. I thought I'd show you my application just in case it's of use for any of you. One of the things I would suggest is that if you are thinking of putting in for a laureate, your university should have some examples of laureates. And also, if you ask people who are in the area that you're in, if they would share their laureate application or extracts of it, most people should be happy to share. So, you know, I've shared mine with a number of people and because it's, for what it's worth, it's now older, and but at least sometimes you can get some good ideas about the words to use in certain places, or the, you know, the phrases that are useful, or the emphasis, or even just getting some reassurance about how the proposal might be structured. So I'll show you my application, and you can see it. So just bear with me for a sec. Okay, I'm hoping that you can see that. Susanna, can you see that?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, good. So if you look here, you can see that it starts off with the name of it, the title of it, which is, I called mine Bayesian Learning for Decision Making in the Big Data Era. You've got all of this. You've got a proposal summary. So most of you who've written applications of some kind for the ARC or NHMRC will know that there's a, you know, a short introduction or overview of your, or summary of your proposal. And again, it's about what's the real challenge, what are you going to try to do in this, and how will it change things, and what will be the result. So it's those kinds of points that you want to be able to make in that. The impact statement is going to be about what's the big change, what is it that you will actually do, and what will be the outcome of what you're going to do. So you can see there the kinds of things that I wrote. And then you've got all of the blah about the filling in the application form here. And then you get down to, you go through all of the rope stuff, the thing, I'm sorry, you get through all of that. And again, this is just the descriptions of all of the activities. And so this part here, for example, is a statement addressing the potential to create an enduring legacy that would be enhanced by the Australian Laureate Fellowship. So there are different parts to the rope that you actually need to be writing about. So this part here was like, what is it that is actually going to be to create this legacy? So you can see there that I'm talking about here to meet the demand for highly trained analytics personnel, data analytics personnel here, and how we'll aim to meet that. So you write about that, and then you write about other evidence, and it's pretty boring. I'm just trying to get down to the part here. So this was the actual, again, this was the project. So all of the, like a lot of the stuff above is the 40%. So you really do have to put a lot of effort into that. And then the project and the innovation is the 25%. So mine was about Bayesian learning for decision making in the big data era. I wrote about some aims here, and you can see how I was trying to sort of state it was around, you know, now that we've got this data, what are we going to do with it? And I had a research program here, which was around analyze, learn, decide, and apply. And so this was the sort of research program. And then there were some challenges that were going to be addressed through that research. And then also the lack of skilled statisticians who can model and analyze the data. And so the overall aim was to increase capability and capacity in big data statistical analytics, developing Bayesian learning methods for key problems in the analysis of big data, and using these for improved decision making. And so trying to set up this this program of work that really makes it feel like it has to be done now. This is the good time to do it. This is this meets the national priorities, and it can then provide, you know, these outcomes that are going to benefit Australia. So that's the general idea. I think that there's I'll leave it at that, and then I'll hand over now to, I think is it Scott? Hand over to you, Scott.
Hello. Okay, thanks, Kerrie. So it's really good going second because Kerrie's already said the good stuff, and now I can just echo it and say that's exactly right. So I've got 10 minutes, and so I prepared 30 minutes worth of content. So let me just tell you, start off with my experiences in fellowships. I've been fortunate enough to have two, one an early career fellowship and one a mid-career fellowship. The early career fellowship is similar to the DECRAs now. These were ARC QE2 fellowships, except they had the nice sweetener that they're over 5 years rather than the 3 years of DECRA previously. The eligibility for these things is the usual thing. There's you're eligible up to so many years from PhD. I think this was 7 or 8 at the time. And you're allowed to apply so many times. So I was allowed to apply twice. So what I did was I basically chose the last 2 years in which I was eligible and applied in those years. So the first time I completely crashed and burned, and the second time in 2010, I was lucky. Similar thing for the future fellowship, which is the 4-year mid-career one. It's up to 15 years from PhD. Again, you can apply twice. So I applied at 14 years from PhD, crashed and burned quite well, and then tried again the year afterwards and was more successful. So when should you apply? My personal opinion is that you should apply at the upper end of the eligibility range. So in years 4 and 5, if it's 5 years from PhD, and years 14 and 15, if it's from 15 years from PhD, and also try up to the number of permissible attempts that you're allowed. So again, that's if you have 2 attempts, it's years 4 and 5 or years 14 and 15. Why? I guess this is the obvious thing. So why apply at the end? Well, your CV will be the strongest possible. You'll have taken all the chances available to you, which is important because, you know, you'd always be wondering, what if I'd applied again? Could I have gotten it that time? You know, if you worry about these things like me. But also potentially more importantly, you'll have the opportunity to improve your application from your previous attempt and to smooth off some of the mistakes that you made. So CV is going to be possible, maximum possible strength. All grants are competitive, fellowships are insanely competitive. So if you're 3 years from PhD and you're going up against somebody who's 5 years from PhD, then obviously they're likely to have a much more substantial track record than you are and will be graded such compared to yourself. So each extra year you can substantially add to your track record. And of course, yeah, it's no surprise that people who get these fellowships are, you know, towards the end, if not necessarily the end of the eligibility range. So if you know you're going to apply for one of these things, or you're planning to, don't just decide 3 months before the deadline in the final year. Plan these things because you need to have the strongest CV possible. You need to look at your CV objectively, give it to a friend, find where are the gaps, what are you missing, and then come up with a plan to fill them. So this is very sort of structured and methodical. For example, when I was looking at my first fellowship, the DECRA equivalent, I was told that I would need about 16 to 18 papers to get it from people who'd had it in the field. And the good news was that I did not have 16 to 18 papers. I was nowhere near that. So I knew that I had to focus particularly over the next 2 years in order to get the CV that was even close to that I felt would give me a chance. And a few other things in my CV that I felt was missing as well. The other important thing is that you have the, 2 goes if there's 2 goes, or 3 goes if there's 3 goes. And the reason for this is that you can improve. You make all the mistakes the first time, and there are lots of mistakes to make, but you can fix them the second time around. So a particular example I had in my future fellowship, I was following Kerrie's lead here and doing something in big data. And everything was going fine, except if you use terms like big data, then the word cloud of your application is used to pick your assessors. So saying big data, that means I'm going to get some computer scientists there. And I suspect it was a computer scientist assessor, but they basically said, oh, look, there's no need for statistics with big data. There's no variability. You know the values of everything. So obviously I was very pleased to get this, and I expressed that to myself quite emotionally. But the problem is with this then is that your application is pretty much dead. I could look at this person's report and see I was getting C's for this. And as a result, you really need all your assessors backing you to really get over the line in fellowship. So this pretty much killed my application, which I was very impressed at. So giving yourself another shot at it afterwards when you've made the mistakes gives you the best chance of success the second time round or the third time round. So I put the same project in, I improved it in various ways. And one of the improvements was that the words big data were not there. So Kerrie was brave enough to get through without doing this. I removed big data completely and instead used large and complex data sets. And in my reviews the second time round, I didn't get, as far as I could tell, any, although there might have been some reasonable ones in there. So what is an improved application? I guess there's a footnote there. It basically means when you write your application, you're often leaving lots of things sticking out that reviewers can, if they want to be mean, they can grab onto it and be mean about that. So for me, the improvement is that you smooth your application off. There's less potential issues potentially sticking out that haven't been covered off for people to lash onto and ruin your day. So the most important things, as Kerrie said, absolutely track record. And you have to sort of get into your sort of head, the reviewer's head here. Some reviewers are lazy. I've got a slide on this later. And rather than looking to do constructive reviews that they spend time on, it's quite easy to quickly read something and say, oh, Scott's not strong there, or Scott's not got a strong enough background there. And to find fault and pull you down is to holistically assess the project. So the fewer excuses you can give them, this is defensive writing almost. The fewer excuses you can give them, the better. And that's sort of not just in CV, but your whole writing. So the things you obviously need are good numbers of papers per year, first authorships where possible, or explaining why you're second author if it's another disciplinary thing. Q1 journals, absolutely need these, but everybody who's applying, you need more to distinguish yourself. Good things that you really should show are how you have, in any way possible, you've positively influenced your field. Maybe you've, given some ideas in a different research direction that other people then have written papers in that area. Or, the number of citations on one paper was great and it really showed that people were interested in that. And, some other work subsequently been done. So this is basically impact. Is there any way you've written papers and you've got a list? Well, fantastic. Have you actually done something that was worthwhile, that's had a positive outcome or impact? That's more important. The other aspect of this is showing that other people think your research is great. Anything that indicates that someone puts value on the work you've done is also a strong thing. So things like awards, invitations to give talks, reviewing papers and grants. Somebody has sought you out based on that they think you're good at your research. So anything that you is important. Kerrie talked about outreach. You can do outreach to the discipline. Maybe you're on the SSA branch council or something, or you're working with schools, writing for the conversation, or writing our software packages for research translation. All these things are great. It shows you are more than just that list of papers, which you often see in applications. You're a more rounded researcher. You're going to give back to the community and the research environment and Australia. Other good things are to show a little bit of the student supervision, especially if you've managed to process a PhD student or a research honors student or the like. It shows that you're in control of your research and you're not just following on your supervisor's footsteps if this is an ECR application, or you have research leadership if it's a higher application. Trajectory is important. You've got the papers that you've written, but then somehow you should always find space in the application to put that list of papers that you've got submitted that are on the archive, so you can find them, people can look at them, and then have 5, 6, 7, I don't know, preprints mysteriously submitted to the archive just before you submit your grant application. I don't know what you want to do here, right? But have that list somewhere that shows you've got this, and then you have this extra research here that's in process. So while you might only have 14 papers written, suddenly it's up to 20 when you include the extra in progress research that's under peer review now. Important one that I'll refer back to a little bit later is show that you're able to handle running a research project in any way. So you can run a research program, you can handle a budget, you can handle a research group. Do you have any experience in doing this? If you've had a previous grant or a fellowship, show that you've been productive with it. So, you know, if you ever have, you know, an ARC grant, never just have one paper on that grant. You need to demonstrate that you've got many papers or many positive outcomes. And, you know, state this so that you're implying, you know, you've given this fellowship. Here's my track record of productivity from the money you've given me before. This is what you're going to get. It reassures reviewers. A lot of what you have to do is kind of talk up your case. There is a tendency, especially in Australia, to overclaim. I think this is very dangerous. So kind of things that, you know, I might do. I might want to say, I'm the strongest Bayesian in the world for this project. Or my best Southern Hemisphere for the statistics PhD experience. Clearly, these are entirely false. They're blatantly wrong. And if a reviewer reads it and thinks that's not true, well, you're in trouble. So I'd say do not do this at all. There are ways of writing this that won't annoy people. So, you know, if you're saying these things, then either one of two things is true. Either you believe it, in which case perhaps you're a fool and you shouldn't be trusted with this fellowship in the first place, or you don't believe it, in which case you think your examiners are a fool, in which case you're going to annoy them, and you know, you never want to annoy your assessors. So don't do it either way. You can always put in mitigating words to keep the sentences really as strong as you'd like, but still make them true and defensible. So rather than I'm the strongest Bayesian in the world for this project, I could instead say I'm one of the strongest early to mid-career Bayesians nationally for this project. Now there's a lot of words there. Choose the qualifying words that are appropriate for you. But the key words that are important there are strongest. You know, I probably should have the word researcher in there as well. The strongest researcher in there as well. As long as you can have that in a claim that sounds, you know, positively framed, then you're still having the effect that you want. But now you've got a true statement rather than something that's too much. Second most important thing is the project, of course. A lot of, I guess, projects that I've seen, people have written down a lot of, you know, ideas for papers. They've noticed that, hey, these are all in you know, Bayesian statistics or something like that. Therefore, their research is, you know, I'm going to do Bayesian statistics, and here's some projects I'm going to do, and that's the hook. Except it isn't a hook because it's not compelling. You know, anybody can write a list of projects that they would like to do. There's no compulsion there. So what I've tried to do, and what I would encourage you to do, is have the overall cool research idea that your assessors can relate to. Don't forget, you've got to hook people in pure maths who are also in the, you know, maths and stats assessment panel, people in computer science. You need a cool research idea that's, you know, it's attractive. It seems as though it's exciting, and there's a cute idea in there, and then somehow you put all of your, you know, otherwise perhaps not necessarily related project ideas under that, but you're sending it on the cool, exciting bit, regardless if there's some boring bits in your application as well. And that just gives people something to latch onto. That's the idea, not you know, Bayesian statistics, some stuff, which is generic. So related to that, I mean, you've got to communicate why somebody in a different discipline would conclude that your proposal is a must fund compared to something in their own discipline. Why would a pure mathematician on the panel support your project rather than a fellowship in pure maths? And the same for a computer scientist. So you have to find the compulsion. Why must it be funded? It can't just be, oh, look, I want to do these things, please fund me. Or it would be nice if these things were done by somebody at some point. There's no compulsion there. No one's going to fund you for that. So there has to be almost a sense of urgency that you need to convey in your proposal, in my opinion, in order that people say, look, this is right. Look, I have to fund this one right now. I can't wait until the next round. This has got to be funded right now because in a year's time, we'll have missed out. So is the compulsion, why must it be funded now? And other things which are always important are significance and innovation. These are sometimes their own sections. They've sort of blurred them in recent years. But it's like what Kerrie was saying. So it was 25% on, okay, well, it's kind of hidden there. So it's not quite, it's slightly different in the laureates, but it should do 25% on innovation. How important is it? What are the fantastic ideas that you've got and the new things? And you should write in proportion to the percentages. So if it's 25% on significance and innovation, then you should write 25% of your page space of your application, of your 10 pages or 8 pages, should be dedicated to that. So, almost a full page on why is this significant? In dot points, easily readable. A full page on innovation. If you're not doing that, and this is the marks allocation scheme, writing to stuff, it's not going to give you percentage marks. So perhaps reconsider the weighting you're giving to stuff. And then the other thing is, assessors, they're reading 100 applications, or at least the panel members. Yours is number 73. They've read 72 before. Don't let them deduce things about your application. Tell them directly. Don't let them be guessing. Presentation. Look, this is obvious. Don't write a wall of text. Use white space. Use small paragraphs. So a maximum that I try to use is 8 lines per paragraph and 1 point per paragraph. I was checking Kerrie's proposal when she put it up. She did have one paragraph that had 11 lines in it. So that was naughty, but the rest were down to 6 to 8 lines. So there was, a point that she made in each paragraph, and then there's a break to the next one. And that's an easy way to sort of break up your argument logically. And also, I think in that setup is where you sort of, highlight a key phrase, like I have in bold there. So if someone's, they've read your application, they've got a sense of it, they've gone to fill in the assessor's form at the end and they've forgotten some stuff, so they come back. If they can glance through your paragraphs and there's one key phrase highlighted in each paragraph that basically tells you what that paragraph was about, then in one glance, they can completely assess what's in one page rather than having to read through the text and remember it. And they go, oh yes, I remember what this is about now. And you've controlled the narrative ahead based on what they're reading there. So that then when they go back to write their final thing, they're writing what you want them to write, is the plan. I'm terrible at psychology. But then the rest of the stuff is, use white space, put in a nice diagram for time out of research, break up the text, use an image if you want to weight them up. And again, exactly what Kerrie was saying. Keep everything in plain language for the majority of the application, and then only get into technical detail for a small part of it where you're directly talking to the discipline experts. Okay, so one that nobody told me and I figured out eventually when I started reviewing more grants myself, especially for ECR fellowships, is usually you're an unknown quantity. Yes, you've got some papers, people may have heard of you, they might not, but as a result of this, you're asking the RC to give you $300, $400, $500,000 to do some research. Okay, nobody knows. Can you handle the fellowship? So you are a risk. If there are 2 applications, one person's well known and they've delivered before, one person's unknown and they've not handled the grant before, who's the safer bet for ARC public money? Well, it's the person who's got the experience and we know that can deliver. So if you're relatively young, then you have to mitigate that perceived risk in the reviewer's eyes. So there's a couple of ways you can, well, potentially a lot of ways you can do this. 2 simple ones. Leading up to your application, and again, this is the hard slog years before doing it, just make sure that you somehow give talks at conferences. You give talks in seminars. You put your face in front of people in Australia and perhaps others around the world who are potentially likely to be your assessors. And you need to give them the assurance that you are competent, you speak and present well, and that you're doing good work. If I see, and of course I will never admit to this, but if I see application from somebody that I know, I've got a preformed opinion of what I think of that person and their research. And fortunately, it's mostly positive for everybody. But if there's someone who I haven't come across before, I don't have those preformed opinions, and so I think, is this person a bit more of a risk compared to somebody who I've seen and I know the quality of their work? So you kind of want to get that in there a little bit. The other thing is, it's it's not just you that's doing the project. I mean, it is because it's an individual research fellowship. But if you surround yourself with mentors, experienced collaborators, there are overseas visitors who are experienced coming in. The overall research environment, if you have a bad 6 months, there is a system and environment around you to pull you back on track, to recover the fellowship, to recover the research. All of that mitigates the risk and makes you a low risk investment. You may still be a risk. Everyone's at a risk early on until they've got a proved track record, but you want to have a lower risk perceived than somebody else. Think about the two types of assessors. I realize I'm slightly over time, so I'll just go a little bit quicker. Two types of assessors. There's type 1, and please don't be this assessor yourself when you review others' applications. But again, it's what I suggested before. They've read the application and they're giving value as an examiner just by finding problems. It's easy to find problems and pull people down. So if there's a small CV weakness, they'll jump on it and say, oh, Scott's no good because he hasn't done this. Or, you know, because you have to sort of describe your research in a very compact way because space is limited, there's always communication issues. You've written something too short. They say, oh, look, this wasn't discussed, this is an issue. And they jump on that, and they're probably grading you down for that as well. So really, they focus on reasons to say no, which is not bad in itself, but usually they don't give enough detail to allow people to redress that in the rejoinder. And also what I see quite a bit, which really annoys me, is that reviewers quite often don't respect the fact that this is 1 year of the applicant's life. And they're not giving, in my opinion, due respect to the effort and opportunity cost that goes into everybody's application. So by doing a rubbish review, you're really sort of, you know, being a disservice to the community. The other type of reviewer, this is the one that you should do. They may have exactly the same opinions as reviewer type 1. They may still think there's all these flaws are here. However, what they're going to do is they're going to look at not the details, but look at the whole project and evaluate that as a whole. If there are issues that are important, they will not say, look, this is a problem, it's unfundable from here. They'll say, could you provide a bit more detail on, or could you discuss a little bit more about this issue? So basically they've identified something which is important, but they've presented it in a way that's non-aggressive, but also giving you a chance to address that in the rejoinder. And that's the major difference between the two types of assessors. They'll raise the same issues, but one will give you enough detail in order to address it, and they won't present it aggressively. So, also, when you're writing reviews, you know, the related issue is, you know, the comments that you write must be directly related to your scores, which means that if an applicant successfully argues against what you said, the implication is that then your score, which has presumably gone down, could be increased by the panel member. So really, it's an opportunity to empower the panel members here. So I'm finishing up now. So they're very important. If you have a dodgy review, it gives you a chance to get mitigate it or turn it around into a positive. So my technique is you know, traffic light, visual traffic light thing here. So I'll go through my reviews, I'll put them in a document, I'll highlight red for something that's bad, and usually there's a lot of red in my reports. There's amber for implied criticism. So sometimes criticism is, you know, passive or subtle. They'll use words like, Scott is a good researcher. Really by that they're saying he's not the world's best researcher instead, right? So they're saying something less, but they're hiding it behind what they're not saying. So sometimes you have to sort of look for those and highlight, is that implied criticism? Do I need to address it? And the other is green, overt, open support. Then what I do is I open my rejoinder, I have the green paragraph. You know, I pull every single quote of anything that looks positive about my referee reports, and you know, and pick out all the strong words. So if anyone happens to accidentally say the word excellent, I'll say reviewer A says, you know, Scott is excellent, or very strong, or the project is, you know, fantastic, or has a good chance of success. I will grab and wordsmith and make an excellent, short, 2 or 3 sentence narrative at the start. Then I'll hit through all of the red comments. I think maybe Adrian will talk a bit more detail about this, so I won't go into too much detail. So I'll hit all the red important ones. If I think I can ignore it, and if I think the panel member won't talk to it, I will just ignore it rather than raise it and try and make it seem more of an issue than it actually is. The amber comments, if I think it's a slight and I should address it, then I will also address those in a positive way, but I'll always end on a positive note. So here's one example where I got, I had, well, it's sort of a reddish amber comment. So basically it's about track record, and it said basically Scott's publications, there are some good ones early on, but in recent years there are many filler applications. Now, as far as the comment goes, that's perfectly fine as a criticism. You know, it's either true or people have an opinion which is valid. So it's not the comment itself that's the issue. It's just that, you know, it's kind of implying that the research quality has dropped over the years, which it hasn't. It's always been terrible. But in a fellowship application, which is about research quality, that could be the difference between funded and not. So I felt, even though it was not fully red, it was a little bit amber, that was something I had to address. And I found what I felt was a good way of addressing it. And my argument was, well, these filler publications are in fact collaborative research in other disciplines. And in fact, this future fellowship, which is what it was for, was actually specifically designed for cross-disciplinary and collaborative research across disciplines. So I pointed this out, and then I said, look, accidentally, I've also happened to have an award for collaborative research. So therefore, I'm actually a perfect candidate for this fellowship. So actually, I took the criticism that said I'd filler publications and made filler publications an admission from the referee that I was the perfect candidate for this. I don't know if actually turned anybody around at the end of the day, but it took the criticism, made it positive, and actually another excuse for me to say, look, I have an award, or whatever I wanted to use in there to sell that point. I guess the implied additional point there is know your funding scheme, because they're all different. DECRA's not the same as Futures, and they're not the same as Laureates. So you might be strong for one, but you might not be strong for another. Okay, I think I've chatted for far too long, so thank you for everyone for listening. I'll hand over to Adrian now.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So my perspective is more from the NHMRC. I have had failed applications to the NHMRC, but more applications to the NHMRC. I'll just pick up on two things Scott said there, because I have very similar experiences. So I once had a reviewer's comment that, oh, well, this person has so many publications because they're a statistician. So, I mean, I do have a good number of publications, but that immediately, undermined one of my few strengths by doing that. So now I actually always say in applications, and I even have it on my CV, yes, I have a lot of applications, a lot of published papers. Yes, I'm a statistician, but I never accept GIF's authorship. I say, if I do a regression analysis and nothing else, I'm in the acknowledgements. And I say, I'm only an author on a paper where I've made a contribution to the study design, the writing, and the statistics. Again, because it's very frustrating when you get a comment like that and you've got no way of helping. Once it's done, you can't go back. So, and I think picking up on another point which Scott said, I mean, that was obviously a type 1 reviewer. Get somebody to read your application. In fact, get multiple people to read your applications, being that nasty reviewer, and ask them to pick up on all these niggles, because like Scott said, it's a whole year of your life. You want to get any of these niggles or things that look a bit odd, you want to nip them in the bud and say, okay, this might look odd, but there's a reason for it. And another thing we once did, actually, because we got funding we did some research on research funding. So we had some mock panels, and I put my application into a mock panel, and I got the whole recording of what the panel said. And it was actually amazing. So, you only get discussed for about 10 minutes in these things if you're lucky. The panel actually spent 5 minutes of my time on this one graph that I'd put in, and on this kind of minutiae about this graph. And it was so frustrating to see that. So that was kind of the thing that Scott said about a smooth application as well. And you don't want to give them this kind of hook that they can then go down this kind of rabbit hole and waste this precious time for you. Now, it is a balancing act, because you want to put interesting stuff in there as well. You don't want it to be completely vanilla, but look out for things like that. Okay, so, oops, my slides. Okay, one thing I wanted to say, and again, this is maybe more aimed at the panel. but it is you as well. Look, appreciate your variance. You can look at these forms sometimes and, you know, they've got boxes that you've got to fill out. So there's kind of this impression, well, if you tick that box and that box, if you've got the papers, if you've got the invited reviews, if you've got the editorials, that you'll be okay. But it annoys me that there's that idea. We should be appreciating a variance in science. Not everybody's good at everything. I know scientists who are great at presenting, maybe not so good at doing science, and vice versa. And we really need this variance, and that variance extends to gender, to background, to race, and I'd say it extends to more people in statistics as well. So we need more people in statistics. So please do apply, because we've got a desperate shortage in this area. If we just fund everybody who looks the same and ticks all the same boxes, that's actually really bad for science and for Australia. Although I did see, this is all hyperlinked, so you can get the paper. There is a recent paper in the BMJ actually on promotions that showed that Australia was one of the worst countries for box ticking when it comes to promotions. Now, the review process is a terrible black box. I think it's very hard to know what happens. And in fact, the best way to find out what happens is to go on panels. And I think Scott said, you know, he changed his behavior after seeing what was happening on a panel. There's also this weird thing about, you know, wanting excellence in research. That there's these two little pink things are hyperlinked papers. Nobody can actually define what excellence is when it comes to scientific research. It's actually, I think it's impossible to define. Competence is far more important, in my opinion. And then we also do have this kind of, you know, what do peer reviewers want? So that's hyperlinked to one of the papers we wrote. And they're just these two examples here of this kind of schizophrenic review. So you have one reviewer saying, I think the proposals that rank the highest, they're stretching the boundaries of where we are at in the research at the time. So, you know, they're really looking for that novelty, that stretch. But then the next reviewer, all grant writing is selling, and I'm not interested in how clever you are or how intellectual you can be. I just want good, solid, doable research, which is going to make a difference. So, you know, you've got to appeal to kind of both these people, one of them who's just happy for solid science and one of them who wants the most exciting stuff. So that's where I really think that writing the best applications I've seen really do get this balancing act right. You've got to tread the line of novelty and feasibility. And Kerrie mentioned earlier as well, you know, this balancing line of being deep, but also broad. So look, it is very tough to do. This is generally much harder than writing papers. Now, one of the best tricks I've ever seen in one of the best grants I've ever read was a person who, whenever they said they were going to do something novel, they said, but don't worry, I've done this before, or something very similar. So, because again, it's something that Scott said, you know, grant reviewers are nervous, they're handing out a lot of money, they don't like taking a risk. So whenever you tell them, yes, I'm going to take a risk, which is on the one hand, pleasing them because they like novelty and the system is all about novelty, immediately you reassure them that yes, this is novel, but I've got all my ducks lined up and we can definitely do this because we've done similar things. You should expect failure. Don't expect to get it first time. In fact, I mean, I've had a load of failed applications, and I looked through after the bushfires, because I did a lot of applications on things like air pollution and temperature epidemiology, and had all these applications listed there. You could see maybe they'd get funded this year because of what happened with the bushfire crisis. But, you know, unfortunately, the system I find in Australia is a bit reactive and is a bit conservative. I should admit some of these applications weren't that great. I think I did get better at writing them. I think I did struggle to convince people that these kind of issues were a problem in Australia, because obviously I was pitching that we needed to worry about pollution and temperature in Australia. So when in 2005, I actually had 0 successes and 7 failures. I think I went on to have another one as well. So I was worried that maybe I should quit research. So as a good statistician, I did a sort of Bayesian calculation here. You can read I've hyperlinked to the full blog down there. So I created a prior for you know, my probability of winning a fellowship. I think it was a beta prior with 1 success and 4 failures. So that gives you an average probability of about 0.2. Then I stuck all my 7 failures in, and I got a posterior probability of 23% of still being in the top half. So I was kind of encouraged by that, encouraged enough to go on. Obviously, this was just a little bit of a joke, but the point I'm trying to make here is that this is a very noisy system. And, you know, even up to 7 failures. In fact, look, you need to go up to 12 failures to have a more than 90% probability of being in the bottom half. So don't be discouraged by a few failures. Now, I should say the reason I was able to have 7 or 8 failures was because I was lucky enough to be funded by other work. And so I carried on being able to be in my research career whilst still producing work and still producing my own research. So that was lucky. And I know other people don't have that, but that is maybe one advantage we do have as statisticians, that you can find work and still try and keep in the game. Next slide. So I think there's, again, I'm getting on the noisy system here, but we should understand that there is definitely some luck in here. And not just when it comes to fellowships, to jobs, to everything. So don't be too downhearted if your grant was rejected. Really don't overinterpret the reviewer's comments. I think scientists become incredibly unscientific when it comes to reviewers' comments. And I've seen people go through things and say, oh, I know why I didn't get it this year, and I know why I did last year. Scott kind of said something there. Now, that was a nice example. I think Scott gave, you know, something very specific. But people do seem to think they know when something is going to get funded or not. But really, people can't tell you that, because it can depend on things like that are totally out of your control. For example, whether you're seen before or after lunch could have an effect, whether you're seen on a Monday or a Friday. And the other big thing, of course, is the reviewers that get selected to review your grant that year. You know, that is a random process. Some year you'll get, maybe like Scott, you'll get the computer scientists who didn't really see the point, and then other years you'll be lucky enough and get people who see the point of your work. Similarly, if you win, don't get carried away with your success as well. Acknowledge that you've lucked out a bit. I think one of the best things to do, you know, it is a bit daunting when you come to face these applications and you do get this big blank, all these boxes that you've got to fill out. So something I've started a long while ago, and I really encourage you doing, is mostly because I have a terrible memory, I try and keep a perspective list of everything I've done. So I have a simple Word document. Other people have an Excel spreadsheet that's more, I'm sure you could probably do something much nicer in R, where you can categorize things and things like that. But it just, even small things I will stick in there. I'll stick this in today, you know, did career panel, blah, blah. And then when it comes to that empty box and, oh, you know, what can I put in here? You've got a ready list there straight away to help you out. Okay, the final thing, I think just to say, especially these days, hopefully it's not all about papers and books. And again, especially for us, I think we're quite lucky. We can expand out into other areas. So, you know, I know some statisticians who've done some really interesting things with software, with apps, with YouTube videos, with training materials. If I'm a reviewer, that sort of stuff definitely appeals to me. You know, that's great outreach, that's great leadership, great training. I would definitely recommend going on a writing course and then going on it again. And that's exactly what I did. I did that about 15 years ago. I went on a course by an editor, and it absolutely changed my writing style, which has had an immense benefit for my research career. Even just one of the simplest tricks ever, and you can do this with a fellowship application, reading the first sentence of every paragraph. So ignoring all the other stuff, just reading the first sentence of every paragraph and seeing how that flows makes an absolutely remarkable difference. Now, I think this has been mentioned already as well by both Scott and Kerrie. I think one mistake I made before was trying to pile in absolutely everything I've done. And because you're a statistician, and especially in health, you get to work with lots of different people. So, you know, it did kind of look a bit hodgepodge. So I think the year I won, and I'm not overinterpreting that as I criticized myself for earlier, but I think I learned in the end that maybe one consistent story that maybe of more limited scope compared to all the things I did was probably better than trying to mention everything. So, you know, you may have to sacrifice some of the stuff you've done to make this lovely consistent story that can be understandable by people like good scientists outside of statistics. And then lastly, again, this is hyperlinked there. So I actually I finally did win an NHMRC fellowship, and it's available there. So you can click on it and have a read. And if you read it, and if you look at my CV, you'll notice that I haven't done a lot of the things that I said I would do. And yeah, that will probably harm me when it comes to getting reassessed. But, you know, that's just the way science happens. I thought these things were going to happen, and some things turned out not to be possible. So I hopefully still did good things. I will stop there.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. That was amazing. Super informative and interesting. We don't have a lot of extended time for discussion like we originally planned, but we have covered a lot of information already. So if there are any burning questions, please feel free to enter some in the chat window now. But I guess I think we can probably get through just a couple, maybe, if people are willing to go slightly over time. And so I guess one question I have is just, Scott gave some great feedback on and advice on, you know, when you should be applying for these fellowships, and it works really well for ARC with the specific years. I guess NHMRC tends to these really broad years, and I don't know if Laureate fellowships have any year restrictions or the number of times you can apply restrictions. So given those kind of circumstances, how would you know when you're kind of strong enough to be worth having a punt?
I'll answer first. I mean, I think it's worthwhile looking at there are the successful fellows that are put up each year, and then you can stalk them online to see what they look like, what their profile looks like, and so sometimes you can sort of self-assess against those. So that's one way to sort of gauge whether you're ready. Of course, there'll be the year restrictions, and so then you need to say, well, this is the last year I'll be able to apply, or maybe I'll apply earlier because then I can get a practice run, but be aware then of what the constraints are about second applications.
Awesome. We have another question. Does the panel have any tips for interdisciplinary researchers whose work really does cross disciplinary boundaries?
Yeah, I'll just to briefly chip on the other one. I'd say one thing I really recommend is thinking about it early, and maybe thinking about bailing early if you don't think you've got it this year, because these things take an enormous amount of time and there's huge opportunity cost there. You could be boosting your CV. So don't write the full thing straight away. Write something small, send it to a group of people and get them to be tough and see if you've got that. Now, on interdisciplinary research, yeah, look, I think that's very tough, and I think statisticians really suffer with that. And you know, because I think I have, because I've worked with a number of different groups, and there's a Nature paper on this, I think, that used Australian data that showed, yeah, that interdisciplinary research suffered. And I think what happens is when panel members, I think the evidence is when panel members see something they know. So if you're a mathematician, you see something in maths, the score will either be very high or very, very low. And then if there's something that they're not sure about, they tend to, it's less extreme, but it tends to just be sort of below the average. So it is very tough. And I would say maybe that's where, yeah, you've got to try and use maybe some of the careful spin that Scott talked about, but maybe try and not make it interdisciplinary and try and focus on one area to get that simple story that we talked about as well. I'll stop there.
Yeah, just picking up on that, I think I'd agree. I think if you're pitching yourself, you know, between two main areas, then you're going to lose out because nobody will want you in their area. It's better potentially just to pick one area, but also then to spend time pulling out, you know, from your collaborative work exactly what your contribution was, and, you know, trying and framing that, you know, explaining how critical it was in, you know, clever ways in order to achieve those outcomes. And, you know, it's basically you're trying to say, look, I have these skills to do that, I have skills to solve this problem, and then bringing all that together under your theme. And then, you know, that theme just magically matches the theme of the fellowship that you're applying for, and somehow bring it all together. If you're doing it interdisciplinary, then there's no way that anyone individual is really interdisciplinary. So it's too wide, and it leaves too many opportunities for people to say, oh, look, they work half in this area, but, you know, they don't work enough in this area, and the same in the other area as well. You sort of spread too thin. So really just identify the strong bits, show that those strong bits are critical in you know, the experience that you've got and the research that you've done, and really maybe just push on that.
I'll add one thing to that. I agree with what both Adrian and Scott have said. But sometimes you can have, like, what is the core that you're doing in the interdisciplinary space? And so you can have, like, what is it that you're going to focus on? And then you can say, I'll be working across, like, what is it that's the common element in those different disciplines? and then can you draw that together and say, well, that's your space, you know, that you sit at the intersection of these different areas, and then that's very valuable because you bring the expertise and the knowledge and the problems from one area and help to solve that in another area. So if you can extract out what it is that is the interdisciplinary sort of novelty, I guess, and that you sit there and that then you work across these a couple of targeted areas where your strengths are, then that can also work. But just to say, well, I work across these different areas is tough. But you know, you can. I mean, if you look thinking of a fellowship, what is it that you do that is the expertise, the really crucial, you know, the research area that sits in the middle of these different disciplines?
Great. One more question. Do you think overclaiming is more common and almost expected in NHMRC versus ARC?
Look, I would say a funny thing you'll meet people try and second guess what other people are doing. I would say some of the panels I've seen, you can get really harshly judged, as Scott said. If people sniff out that you're overclaiming, that is really damaging to your reputation. So I would strongly recommend not doing it. I think some of the wording that Scott came up with is good. You know, there is this striving for excellence and to all these fancy adjectives, but I would be very cautious and don't feel you have to do it just because you feel that others are doing it.
Awesome. Did either Kerrie or Scott need to comment or wish to comment on that? No? Okay, great.
Never got the NHMRC, so I don't know.
Excellent. So there is one final question from Jason. Am I wasting my time on book chapters and conference papers? Would anyone like to? Oh, Kerrie's already typed to reply. So
sorry, Susanna. I thought we were going to run out of time, and I just wanted to answer that.
Awesome. Thanks. I appreciate it. That's perfect. So if people are willing, I would like to actually just thank the speakers again. Just did an absolutely outstanding job. I've got so many notes now. It'll be really, really useful. I'd also like to thank Mark Vish, who put in incredible effort behind the scenes giving technical support. We do have a really brief poll, which you should be able to see in a second. If you could just take the time to quickly answer those two super brief questions, that'd be great. But we will go into a short mingling time for anyone who can stay, and this will be a chance to directly ask the speakers questions as well as interact with each other. And I will hand over to Mark to give details.